Today what we're going to be talking about is 6.6 through 6.8 review notes, and this is to help you for your quiz tomorrow. The first problem that I want you to do is number 1. Show that the number is rational by writing it in A over B form. So that means you're basically going to be looking for it to have a numerator and a denominator. So the first one, it says 3.2. I don't want it to have a decimal. Can anyone guess what I need to do to get rid of the decimal to put it into something more similar to A over B form? What do you think? Okay, so I'm going to have instead 3 2/10. Is there any way to reduce 3 2/10? 3 1/5, okay. Now, is that in A over B form?
No.
No, it's a mixed number. So how can I put that in A over B form?
16.
Good job. You do 5 times 3 is 15 plus 1 is 16. 16 over 5. Now, does that look like I have an A over a B, yes or no, class? Yes, it does. Okay, so that is a rational number because it can be put in A over B form. The next one says negative 6 1/2. How would I do that as A over B form? Okay, negative 13 over 2. Notice that he attached that negative to a number. It has to be attached to either the numerator or the denominator in order to be an A over B form. Or, what else could I have written, Kayla?
13 over negative 2.
Good job. I don't care which number the negative is attached to, it just has to be attached to a number. Any questions on that one? Okay, let's go on to example 2. Evaluate the expression and justify each step you take. So looking at the first part, it says 1/14 times negative 2 times 14. I want to switch things around to put things that are kind of alike near each other. Can anyone guess what I want to switch the order of? Good job. We want to do 1 over 14 times 14 times negative 2. Which one of our properties told you that you are allowed to do that? All right, the commutative property. Okay, so that is the commutative property of multiplication. Now, what is the next thing that I want to do? I'm trying to find my answer. It tells me to evaluate it. So what can I do now to 1/14 over 14, or 1 over 14 times negative 2? Okay, it's not 14 over 14. Think about 14. What do we know right here? What number goes under 14 if I want to make it look like a fraction? 14 over 1. So you can think of this as if it said 14 over 1. So I am doing 1/14 times 14 over 1. What is 1/14 times 14 over 1? 1. Okay? Basically what you did right there, because that was a number and its opposite always equals 1 when you're multiplying, okay? So I basically can cross that out, and now I'm multiplying it times 2. So which property told me that a number and its opposite, when you multiply it together, always equals 1?
Inverse.
Inverse property of what? Multiplication. Okay, write that down. All right, I'm just going to put inverse property of mult, which stands for inverse property of multiplication. Now we want to figure out the next step. What is 1 times negative 2? It is negative 2, okay? Because anytime you multiply times one negative number, it's always going to stay a negative. We're going to box that answer because it asked me to evaluate the expression, and you just did. You just solved it. Now, this step that you just did right here, 1 times negative 2, which property tells me that I can multiply any number times a 1 and I will always get itself? The identity property of multiplication. Now, if you remember, the inverse property and the identity property are like best friends. So every time that you have the inverse property, it will always be followed by the identity property. Okay, here we go on to number 3. Evaluate the expression. All right, just looking at this, you might think that seems like a difficult problem, but I'm going to show you that there's a way using the inverse property. What is the key word for inverse? Opposite. Okay, so using this inverse property or the idea of opposites, we're going to be able to cancel out a whole lot of these, and it's actually going to be a pretty simple problem. So if we look at the first one of 40, what's the opposite of 40? Negative 40. Do you guys see a negative 40 up there? Yes. So I am simply going to go like this. Cross out the 40, cross out the negative 40. Now make sure that you're crossing out the negative sign with it. Okay? Going on to the next one. I've got the number 2. What's the opposite of the number 2? Negative 2. Do you see a negative 2 up there? Yes. So you can cross out that positive 2, cross out the negative 2. Going to my next one, I've got this number right here, negative 3/5. What's the opposite of negative 3/5? Positive 3/5. So those two can cancel out. Remember, if you talk about the inverse property says a number and its opposite always equals 0. What's the next number you see up there? Negative 5. What's the opposite of negative 5? Positive 5. Do I have a positive 5 up there? No. So right now what I want you to do is circle everything that's left over that did not cancel out. Negative 5 and negative 5. So now we have to add those together. What is negative 5 plus negative 5?
0. Negative 10.
Listen, sing the song with me. Same sign, add and keep, different sign, subtract. Take the sign of the larger number, then you'll be exact. Do we have a same sign or a different sign? Same sign. Add the numbers, keep the sign. What's your answer? Negative 10. You add the numbers, you get 5 plus 5, you keep the sign, negative 10. Any questions about that? That is the answer to the whole problem. You can only do that because you just use the inverse property. A number and its opposite always equals 0, okay? So that's why we learn these properties, to kind of help us find tricks and shortcuts so we don't have to do this big, huge, long problem. This one, we were able to find it pretty simple, okay? So I want you to try to do the next problem on your own using the inverse property of addition. So we're trying to figure out here if I've got any opposites. What about 5? What's the opposite of 5? Is there one up there? Yes, so I'm going to cross out the 5, cross out the negative 5. Make sure you cross out the negative sign with it. Next up, 3. Do I have the opposite? What is it? Good job. Plus 3, negative 3. Next up, I have a negative 1/2. Is there anything to cancel it out? No. So leave it alone. Negative 7. Anything to cancel it out? What is it? Positive 7. So cross that out, cross that out. Circle what you have left. Raise your hand if you think you know the answer. Addison, what do you think? She says negative 5. Where's? She says negative 1/2. Who got a different answer? Ashley, what'd you get?
Well, like the negative sign in front of the 1.
Okay, so what's the answer?
I don't know how to say that, but negative 1/2.
Okay, good job. That's the thing. You just see what's left over, so that's the same thing. Negative 1/2. Since we're not telling whether it's a rational number, I don't care if the negative is just right in front of it. Okay? So the correct answer is negative 1/2. Any questions on problem B? All right, skip a line. Let's go ahead and write this down. What property is this an example of? So problem A says 1/5 times 5 equals 1. Who thinks they know which property this is talking about? I'm going to read it one more time. 1/5 times 5 equals 1. Birthday boy, what do you think? Okay, you say the inverse. What's the key word for inverse? Opposites. So that says a number and its opposite will always equal 1 when you're multiplying. What is the opposite of 1/5? 5 over 1. So that is correct. Great job. Now it's the inverse property of what? Multiplication, because we are multiplying. I want you to try to do the next 3 on your own. Let's look at problem B. 5 plus 1 plus 2 plus 4 equals 5 plus 1 plus 2 plus 4. Raise your hand if you think that's the commutative property. Who thinks it's the associative property? Inverse property? Identity property? Okay, so the two things we've got, people think possibly the commutative property or possibly the associative property. Let's look right here. The commutative property says I can change the order of my numbers and it won't change my answer. Look at the order I have right here. Read it to me. 5 plus 1 plus 2 plus 4. Read me this. 5 plus 1 plus 2 plus 4. Did I switch around the order of my numbers at all? I did not change the order of my numbers. Notice what's different. The way that I did what to them? The way that I grouped them. Look, this group says 5 plus 1 plus 2. This group says 1 plus 2 plus 4. My grouping is different. My order is not different. The order of the numbers is exactly the same, but the grouping that I put them in is different. So which one has to do with grouping? Associative property of addition. Thank you. Notice it is addition because I am only adding every single time. Any questions on that one? Okay, on to the next one. 7 plus 0 equals 7. Who could tell me which property you think tells me 7 plus 0 equals 7?
Identity.
The identity property. Why does the identity tell me that doesn't change it?
Because a number and 0 doesn't change the identity.
Anytime you add a 0 to a number, it will not change the identity of the number or who the number is. It still stays as a 7. So anytime you add a 0 to a number, every single time, that's going to be the identity property, okay? If I had a multiply in there, times 1, it didn't change the identity. So every time you have a multiplied times 1, that's going to be the identity property of multiplication. Next up, 5 plus negative 5 equals 0. What do you think? Inverse property of addition. Why is it the inverse property of addition? A number and its opposite. Anytime you have a number and you add the opposite, it will always equal 0. And the inverse property of addition tells us that that's true. Any questions on those 4? Okay. How many of you got all 4 of those correct? Excellent job. There will be questions exactly like that on your quiz and your test coming up. Let's go and look at the next one, number 5. What is the key word for the identity property? What is the key word, guys?
Mirror.
Mirror. Just remember, anytime that you are looking in the mirror, it doesn't change your identity. If a number is multiplied times 1 or added by 0, it's like a mirror. It doesn't change the identity of the number, okay? Now, you're not just going to have to know that keyword. You're going to have to know all the keywords on your quiz and your test. Go ahead and write this down. Number 6, use the distributive property to write an equivalent expression and solve. So this has asked me to use the distributive property to write an equivalent expression. So you'll see right there it says 3 times 2 minus 4. If you remember, the distributive property just tells me that everything that's outside the parentheses has to be multiplied by every single number inside the parentheses. So the first thing I want to do before I solve it is write an equivalent expression. What's another way? Using the distributive property that I can write 3 times 2 minus 4.
3 times 2 minus 3 times 4.
You are correct. You multiplied that 3 by everything that was in the parentheses. There was a minus sign in the parentheses, so you wanted to keep the minus sign once again. Now the next thing it's asked me to do is to solve this problem. So let's just kind of work underneath it. Guys, what's 3 times 2? 6. Keep your minus sign. What's 3 times 4? 12. Now remember, I am adding or subtracting integers. Remember, an integer is a positive or negative whole number. So I've got a 6 and I have a negative 12. Is that the same sign or a different sign? Different sign. Okay, same sign, add and keep, different sign, subtract and take. So if you subtract those numbers and take the sign of the bigger number, what's your answer? Negative 6. Any questions on how we came up with that answer? All right, then we're going to go ahead and move on to question number 7. For this one, I want you to use that second sheet of paper that we stapled to the back of your notes. And we're going to go ahead and use our graph paper for problems 7 and 8. So go ahead and write this down. Plot the point and describe its location. Remember, as you are plotting your points, you want to go ahead and label your graph on the x and the y axis. So remember, 0 and 0 is your origin. You'll always do your x-axis first and then do your y-axis. And remember, label the lines, don't label the boxes. Okay, so before we get started, we're going to go ahead and label the quadrants and what they are. Quadrant 1, where is it at? Top right, left, bottom?
Right.
The top right, okay? So just go ahead and over there in that quadrant, we'll put a 1. Now you're going to go to the left, and that will be a 2. Go down, and it will be a 3. Remember, do it in Roman numerals, and then the bottom right is 4. So it's kind of like you're doing a backwards circle. You always start in the top right, and you go all the way backwards circle until you get to quadrant 4. Let's look at the first one. Point L says it is 2 and 4. What comes first, the X or the Y? The X always comes first. Think about it like in the alphabet. The X comes before the Y, so whenever we're doing this over here, X always comes first. Is X left and right or up and down?
Left and right.
Left and right. So I'm going to go left or right first. It tells me to go 2. Is that 2 to the right or 2 to the left? 2 to the right. So I'm going over here to the right, and now I have to go to a 4 in the Y. Do I go up or do I go down? You go up. So count up 4, and then go ahead and put your dot. We are going to label it. What did it tell us to label it as?
L.
An L. Now we've got to tell where its location is at. Where is the location for that? What quadrant? Quadrant 1. So go ahead and write it underneath and box it in. Who would like to come up and show me where I should plot point M? Come on up. All right, what comes first, X or Y? X. So you always start at the origin, 0 and 0. So the X is going to be at a 0. Okay? Now we have to do the Y, -3. Good job. She went down to -3, and then you go ahead and tell me, okay, that's point M. You don't want to just leave a dot all alone because we don't know what point that is. Okay? Now, is that in a quadrant?
Oh.
No, it's not, because it's on one of the axes. Which axis is it on?
Y.
The y-axis. So the location is the y-axis. Next up, N. -4 and 0. What comes first, X or Y? X. Is X left and right or up and down? Left and right. So am I going to go left or right? Go left to -4 and then move 0. Okay? Where is the location? The x-axis. Any questions on how to plot the point and describe its location? Okay, we've only got a couple minutes, so I'm going to show you the last kind of example that you're going to find on your quiz for tomorrow. If you have time, you can go ahead and write it down. If not, I totally understand. This is what it says. Name the ordered pair that represents the points. Okay, so when we're naming these pairs, look at that first one. What does the point say? L, okay? So what you're going to try to do is figure out where L is, all right? So obviously you would label it first when you are working it on your quiz. Okay, so here we go. Let's look at L. In order to get to L, you've got to move left, and then you'll go up. Is there anyone who can tell me what pair you think that is? Mason, what do you think? -2 and 2 is correct. Who thinks they can tell me where point M is? Tati, will you help me out? Point M. Do I go right or left?
Left. 1 and -2.
Okay, look.
I can't see.
Start at 0 right here. And in order to get right there, how many points do I have to move right or left to get to it?
What? Where is it?
M is this little dot right here. If I start at the origin, how many points right or left do I have to move to get to the M? 0. So your X is going to be a 0. And to get to it with the Y, do I go up or down? Down to what number? -3. Excellent job. Birthday boy, help me out with problem N. I start at my origin, and then I have to get over here somehow. Do I go left or right?
Left.
I have to go left. How many?
3.
Okay, so what answer is that? 3 or -3? -3. And do I go up or down to get to N? Go down. So what number do I go down to? -1. And that's where point N is. All right, last one, final one. To get to the O, Addison, start at your origin. I have to move how many places to the right? 2, and then I go up 3, okay? So your points would be 2 and then 3. If you know that, you guys are going to do great on your quiz. So just the last thing I want to remind you of, study for that quiz. This is the hardest quiz I've given you yet. So please do a great job. Actually study these notes and the notes we've taken before.